Welcome to the Sons of Resistance channel. The war between Ukraine and Russia continues to flare up day by day. Ukrainian heroes crush Putin and his army. The war turns into a terrible torment for the Russians day by day. The heroic Ukrainian army does not let the Russian army breathe. Internal conflicts are raging within the Russian army, which is crushed under the power of Ukraine. Putin, who wanted to stop the bad course, took a series of decisions. Putin, who wanted to renew his declining military power, found the solution in the declaration of partial mobilization. Putin's mobilization decree targets 300,000 reservists and former military personnel with certain military expertise and relevant experience. Putin, the protagonist of brutal decisions, targeted 300,000 Russian men for his own interests. After Putin's declaration of mobilization, uprisings broke out in many parts of Russia. Those who did not want to join the military turned the country into a fireball. Putin will continue to throw Russian men into a meat grinder as the war continues. Hundreds of thousands of Russians had to become Putin's pawns in this evil game. With the declaration of mobilization, Putin not only drew the anger of the Russian people, Putin made many wrong decisions. During this war, Russian leader Vladimir Putin tried to approach Iran in order to gain gains on the Ukrainian front, as well as the mobilization decision. Although the Russian leader's connections with Iran are denied by the administration of the two countries, the whole world knows that Russia and Iran are in relationship, especially at the moment. Vladimir Putin combined his decision to mobilize throughout Russia with the weapons he procured from Iran and now pursued victory in Ukraine. But even in the airstrikes he carried out with thousands of drones he bought from Iran, he was unsuccessful. Ukrainian air defense systems succeeded in ending 90% of the attacks carried out by the Russian air forces, with Iranian-made shaded 136 kamikaze-type unmanned aerial vehicles. After this failure, the Russian leader began to despair of the war, but Putin did not give up looking for a way out in order to realize his treacherous plans. The Russian leader did not give up sending the citizens of his country to Ukraine as victims in order to realize his own historical plans. Even if Vladimir Putin calls this process mobilization, according to all the states of the world, this policy of Putin to the Russians is literally sacrificing citizens without mercy rather than mobilization. Russian locals don't want to be victims of Putin's treacherous plans on Ukrainian soil, but Vladimir Putin has imposed such heavy sanctions on Russian citizens who oppose mobilization that people are now either leaving Russia or Putin is leaving because they are so afraid of these sanctions. He becomes a tool, albeit by necessity, in these cruel plans of Russian Defense Minister Shoigu is also seen as the #1 supporter of Vladimir Putin on this issue. After all these injustices, an interesting event took place in Russia. This development, which also occupied the Russian media, was widely discussed on the world agenda. Mobilization failures are mounting after Russian President Vladimir Putin announced on Friday that around 10,000 mistakenly mobilized Russians were being sent back home. Russian Colonel General Andrei Kartopolov, he said at a meeting in St. Petersburg that nearly 10,000 people across the country have returned for various reasons since Putin announced his partial mobilization order on September 21. As the Russian colonel reiterated, this mistake will not be easily forgotten. Putin's mobilization decree targets 300,000 reservists and former military personnel with certain military expertise and relevant experience. Putin admitted that mistakes were made in his partial mobilization. Reports have surfaced that ineligible men have been called up for military service. Morale on the front lines among Russian conscripts is extremely low. Some soldiers, many with almost no combat experience, died trying to escape military service. Meanwhile, Russian men exposed to cramped and deplorable conditions lack food, water, or functional equipment. Many soldiers had to buy their own equipment and medicines. According to the information we obtained from the relatives of the soldiers, we learned that most of the soldiers sent to the front were not trained, and that one soldier received only 30 bullets to be used in the war. Anger at Putin's mobilization order is also growing across the country, with officials being dismissed for mistakes made during mobilization. Putin declared mobilization because he had no troops left to fight. However, the Russian administration could not provide the necessary ammunition and support to the Russian men who were declared mobilized. Putin, who victimizes the children of his own people, does not give up on what he will do, even if he admits his mistakes and shortcomings. Russian President Vladimir Putin, at a meeting held in Kazakhstan capital Astana last week, stated that 222,000 people in Russia are already mobilized to offset the personal losses incurred in the nearly year-long operation in Ukraine, and that the country is waiting for the end of its military service period, he did. At a press conference in Astana last week, Putin said, "This work is already coming to an end. Currently, 222,000 people out of 300,000 have been mobilized in the troop formations." He gave information about the mobilization. "Nothing else is planned for the foreseeable future," Putin said. However, I do not think that Putin's declaration of mobilization will be limited to 300,000 soldiers. It should be noted that Ukraine needs at least 1 million soldiers to stand against its overwhelming power and achievements. Stumbling with the unsuccessful results of the Russian army, Putin made many mistakes. Declaring mobilization to renew his lost military power, Putin was subject to heavy reactions from the Russian people. Putin's problems are endless. Putin is concerned by heroic Ukrainian soldiers. In the midst of Kiev counteroffensive advance, we think that Russia is planning a mass withdrawal from vulnerable positions, possibly in the southern Kherson region, to avoid a devastating rout in Ukraine. As Moscow expects Ukraine's imminent advance in Kherson, it is likely to create conditions for eliminating military and occupying elements on the west bank of the Dnieper River. In recent weeks, Ukrainian troops have launched a counteroffensive in the area captured by Russian forces in the early days of the war. Since the beginning of September, Kiev has reclaimed settlements on the west bank of the Dnieper River. After the Ukrainian army recaptured some settlements, we see Russian forces scatter and loot a fire station in the city of Kherson and ferry fire trucks, stolen civilian cars, and various other household items to Hola Pristan, another city along the Dnieper River. Kherson residents and pro-Russian officials began leaving Kherson last Wednesday, saying authorities plan to move between 50,000 and 60,000 people to the east bank of the Dnieper River within a week. We can see that the Russian forces moved their military equipment from the western bank to the eastern bank of the Dnieper River in the face of the latest developments in Ukraine. The military logical thing would be to take out the men and equipment well to avoid another devastating rout. Such a rout at Kherson could trap Russian forces and equipment on the west bank of the Dnieper River. It seems that Russia is trying to take measures against a possible attack on Kiev. The Russian army, unable to hold on and succeeded in the face of the Ukrainian army, is looking for ways to get rid of the devastating defeat. Russia's only solution is to withdraw en masse. However, the Russian leader is still very reluctant to take this step, as he thinks that the withdrawal will harm the Russian army and Russia. Because Vladimir Putin thinks that if he withdraws from Ukrainian territory, he will lose his political credibility completely. Currently, Vladimir Putin has already lost his political identity at the moment. The best decision for the Russian people and the Russian economy is to put an immediate end to the unfair occupation policy in Ukraine. Otherwise, Russia will suffer more from this war. Volunteer soldiers, especially those included in the Russian army, will continue to die for nothing in the territory of Ukraine if the mobilization continues. In the following processes, we will witness together what will happen in the circle of fire. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications in order to be informed about new videos. Thank you for watching us.